G'day Virtual Pilots, it's Requiem. In today's video we're going to look at how to use the workflow concept with the P-47D. So when we talk about triggers, this is an event which calls for you to perform a flow, and a flow is a sequence of actions you perform in the cockpit for a particular phase of flight. So this P-47 flow document is available in the video description, and it covers things from startup through shutdown. This way you can learn the cockpit layout faster, you'll perform your actions in logical order. This will help reduce your checklist reliance. The checklists and flows can work together as they verify your actions are correct, and this is particularly important in multi-crew aircraft. So this picture is the basis of all the flows in the PDF, and you can download it in the video description there. We overlay various procedures onto this which creates a workflow. The first one we're going to look at is the before engine start. Now if you want to learn these flows properly, you'll sit in your chair with your eyes closed and you visualize the flow as it moves around the cockpit, and you want to reach out physically for where the switches are. This is known as chair flying. This will incorporate multiple methods of learning at once, which will help your learning and your retention of information, and if you can, it's easy to download this PDF and follow along for the video. Alright, so jumping into the P-47 cockpit now, we're going to do the before start. So we're assuming the pre-flight's been completed, and the first step we're going to do is turn on the external power. So we'll bring up the communication menu, talk to the ground crew, and ask for external.
Chief, turn on the ground power.
This is going to plug into a receptacle in the front right of the plane.
Copy. Ground power is now on.
Alright, so now we have ground power connected. We're going to move on to the next step. So we're going to put the flaps in the up position. Landing gear is down. The oil cooler flaps, we're going to put them in neutral. Intercooler flaps, they're going to go to neutral. And the supercharger lever, so one with the B on it, ensure that's all the way to the back. Throttle, we'll open that 1/2 inch. Propeller control will be up to maximum. Then we're going to leave the mixture in the idle cutoff position. Then we move down. You can get the fuel selector valve, the small N. We're going to point that towards main. Going to turn the generator on. And the start and altitude is going to be in the right position there. Coming up, ensure the propeller switch is in automatic. And since this is going to be a local flight, we're going to set the altimeter to equal 0 feet. Now I'm going to set the parking brake, and in order to do this, I'm basically going to click and hold on the T handle, tap the brakes, and let go of the handle. That'll set the parking brake. And if you needed hydraulic pressure for whatever reason to do that, you can use the manual pump on the side. So the tail wheel, set that to unlocked, and we're going to set the radio channel to B so we can talk to air traffic control. Mode switches to the right, and we can request a startup from air traffic control. So we bring up the communications menu, talk to ATC in High Holden, which is our airfield, and request startup.
In field 1-1, request startup.
And here's the engine start flow if you needed to review that before I go through it.
Enfield 1-1, cleared for startup, wind 107 at 3 meters per second.
Alright, so our trigger is complete for engine start. So we're going to set our ignition switch to both. And we're assuming we have a cold engine in this instance. So the fuel primer, we unlock that with right click. We're going to prime it 6 strokes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We right click to lock the primer. So we prime the engine with fuel. We'll right click to engage the starter briefly and prepare the starter for the engine start itself. And then now we're going to need to energize the flywheel for between 15 and 20 seconds. So we'll left click on that, and we'll use the clock up in the top part of the instrument panel. We'll time out 15 seconds. There's 10. There's 15. So you do that, but no more than 20. and release it. And then we're going to engage the starter again, and when the engine starts firing, that's when we're going to bring the mixture up to the auto rich position. So we're going to right click and engage the starter. We're going to hold this for a few seconds after the engine starts. Bring the mixture up to auto rich. You can release the starter now. And to help the engine warm up, I'm going to bring up the throttle so we have between 800 and 1000 RPM. Suction gauge, you want to see between about 3 and 4 inches. And then all the engine instruments on the right hand side, so you'll check oil temperature, pressure, fuel pressure, and the cylinder head temperature. Cylinder head temperature is obviously the one that's most out of line right now. So with that completed, we can look at the pilot's notes for the P-47D, and then we'll look at the after start flow. Here's a big version of the after start flow which you can review before we just go over it in a moment. Alright, so after start flow, the engine is warming up, which is our trigger, so we can disconnect the external power.
Chief, turn off the ground power.
Copy. Ground power is now off.
Alright, so with ground power disconnected, we want to focus on getting our cylinder head temperature up. So we're going to adjust the cowl flaps and close them all the way. This will help us warm up that CHT much faster. And that'll want to be between 100 and 260 degrees. And the cowl flaps are flush with the cockpit, so that's good. Now we can check the gyroscopic instruments. So we want to uncage the attitude indicator. Then we go over to the directional gyro. We verify that it's heading, checks against the magnetic compass, which it does. Get the full electrical supply to the airplane, so we'll turn the battery master on. Then you have your external lighting, which is underneath the throttle quadrant. You can adjust this as required depending on the situation. Gun sight rheostat, I'm going to turn that all the way on. Then we go to the gun safety switch. Pull down the guard, put it to guns and camera, and just verify we have our sight visible, which we do, so that's good. Now we're not going to need it from here, so we can just bring the switch up to guarded. Now one last check, we want to make sure all of our engine instruments are in line before we start taxiing. We're coming up on 100 degrees in CHT, so we should be pretty good, and we can bring up the communications menu and we'll ask air traffic control for taxi instructions.
Field 1-1. Request taxi to runway.
Enfield 1-1. Clear to taxi to runway 29.
So runway 29, we'll take off in that direction. So we'll need to make a right turn. So to disengage the parking brake, we just tap our toe brakes. You can add a little bit of throttle. Just 1000 RPM to get yourself moving. Then you can add some right brake, get some right rudder if you want. Let you swing it around. Then you just do S turns along the taxiway down towards the runway and preparing for takeoff. So that'll complete this video for now and introducing the flows concept to the P-47. The next video is going to have a look at takeoffs and landings. So until then, remember to fly safe and check your six.